And we now know that over 90% of people, the level of thyroid dysfunction they had could have caused weight gain, could have caused fatigue, could have raised their heart disease risk long-term, could have affected their bones, could have raised the risk for thyroid cancer, can do all that stuff. However, for 90% of people or more, medications will not help any of those problems at all. It'll actually cause more risks for other issues, including bone problems, cancer risk, and total mortality risk. But for almost all people who are put on thyroid medications, it will not help them feel better, lose weight, have less risk of diseases, or have better outcomes.
If you haven't done so already, go ahead and click that subscribe button down below. It's a little red button. You punch that, and it's going to notify you every time we put out a new episode that can help you improve your bone health. And then also, if you haven't done so already, head over to BoneCoach.com, sign up for the free 7-day Osteoporosis Kickstart. That's going to walk you through everything you need to be doing right now to get on the path to improvement and stronger bones. After you do those two things, go ahead and press play on this episode, and I'll see you inside. Welcome to this episode of the BoneCoach Show. Joining us today to explore the health of your thyroid and your bones is Dr. Alan Christianson. Dr. Alan Christianson is a board-certified naturopathic endocrinologist who focuses on thyroid care. He is a New York Times best-selling author whose recent titles include the Hormone Healing Cookbook and the Thyroid Reset Diet. Dr. Christianson has been featured on countless media appearances, including Dr. Oz, The Doctors, and The Today Show. He is the founding president behind the Endocrine Association of Naturopathic Physicians and the American College of Thyroidology. Dr. Christianson, it's great to have you here today. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Kevin, thanks for having me. This will be a good thing.
This would be a great conversation. And I always want to start with, maybe you could share your personal journey with how you even became a New York Times bestselling author, got multiple books, you're a leading integrative health physician. Maybe just share a little bit about that.
Boy, yeah, books changed my life and health messages changed my life. I was a clumsy kid. I had seizures. I couldn't really move right from cerebral palsy. And, I was a bookish kid and I was happy enough in the realm of my mind. But the more I tried to socialize and do things other kids did and play and stuff, the more frustrated I got. And, now we have a term called fat shaming. Back in the 70s, there was no term because that was just what you did. It was just normal. And I hated it. So somewhere around adolescence, I decided to quit being nothing but a space nerd and to go pick up some books in the health section. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy. I could do this and I could do that. And, it wasn't straightforward, but I stuck with some things and learned to exercise slowly and progressively and learned to change my diet in some ways and totally changed everything, just phenomenal, and social life changed and everything did. And I was a kid. I'm like, wow, I'm a kid and I found this stuff out. There's got to be a huge gap between what people need and what they know, and it became a passion to close that gap. And diet and lifestyle were a big thing for me. So I wanted to become a physician, but to do it in a way to where I could really use those things. Yeah. And then hormones seemed like a real link between lifestyle and disease. So I wanted to focus on those, and thyroid disease was a natural step.
And you specifically took an interest in thyroid health. So can you tell us a little bit about why that is?
Yeah. So in my residency, I was working with people who were struggling with a lot of issues, and lifestyle alone wasn't enough. They tried to lose weight, but they couldn't, and they were already doing all the right stuff. And I was trained at first to not believe people, think, oh, you're not really being honest, or you're not really trying hard enough. But at some point I'm like, no, this isn't fitting anymore. And I realized that there's ways in which the body doesn't get its own balance proper. And there's actual disease states that were common. And I saw a huge gap between how this was understood in the conventional world and the natural world. And I saw a couple of real solid ways of understanding it and diagnosing it, but really missing the boat for patient-centered treatment. And then I saw a lot of approaches that seemed intuitive and logical, but just weren't safe, and I wanted really, what's happening here and how can we do this effectively? And I'm so excited to talk with your audience because in the last few years, we've learned so much. It's more common than we ever thought, and there's way more room for lifestyle to reverse it than we ever thought. So it's a great time.
And what are the roles of the thyroid, and what is thyroid disease? How do you know if you have a thyroid issue?
Think about somebody wearing a bow tie. It's something about that size and shape and about that place. And it makes these microscopic hormones that control how quickly we make energy, how well our nerves talk to one another within our brain and outside of our brain, and then how well everything fixes itself. So this is not the only thing that affects our bones, of course, but it's one of the things that controls the rate at which we rebuild and break down bone. Also tendons, ligaments, skin, hair, nails, and muscles. So yeah, all tissue repair. This is one of the things that regulates that. But energy, body weight, tissue repair, nerve conduction, mood, energy, movement patterns. Those are the main things that it does.
And then how are you going to be able to tell if something's wrong there with your thyroid function, or maybe that it's contributing to other health issues that you have?
Well, you won't always know without checking. And it can go wrong in terms of growing wrong, like getting cancerous or getting nodules. So it can grow wrong. It can work wrong, meaning it can make too much or too little of that hormone, or it can get inflamed and the body can start to attack it. And any one of those, they can overlap, but any one of those things by itself can cause a lot of problems.
And for growing wrong, maybe let's talk about each of those. Growing wrong,
Sure.
working wrong. Let's go down each of those paths. So can we talk about why would a thyroid be growing wrong? And what does that look like?
This is great for your audience. I'm sure you've talked about things like this. So I think about each part of the body. Imagine like a tile floor, and imagine that these tiles wear out, and a crew comes in at night and gets a little pick and takes out the old tiles and lays down some new ones, right? And so you got one crew pulling out the old ones and one crew putting in the new ones. And as long as they're in sync, it's all good. But if there's too many tiles coming in or not enough old ones coming out, you get proliferation or degeneration. You get too much junk or not enough healthy tissue. So in the case of the thyroid, if its own growth rate is altered, it can proliferate. And right now in North America, the fastest increasing type of cancer in women is thyroid cancer. It's actually tripled over the last couple of decades. So it's way, way, way up on the rise. Thyroid nodules, this is a crazy fact, but you can take your age in years. That's about your percentage risk of having a thyroid nodule. And about 3 to 7% of those thyroid nodules do become cancerous. So that's the main growth issue.
And why is that happening? So why are we getting nodules, and why could that potentially develop into thyroid cancer also?
Yeah, so thyroid disease in general, all those three types of disease share the same underpinnings. And I might table that for our next stage of our discussion. But yeah, basically there's one environmental trigger that stands by itself, and there's genetics and there's age. And there's an interplay of those things behind all these main categories of thyroid disease.
And in terms of testing, how are you going to know if something's not right with your thyroid health? I mean, obviously,
well, so this is,
it's a growth issue you could probably feel or see visually, but what about testing?
Well, so a growth issue, you're right. If it's bad enough, it can be just visible. There's a lot of stories about celebs where they're doing a show or something, and a fan says, "Hey, that's weird," and they write in, and the person goes and gets checked out, and sure enough, they had a lump, they need surgery. That happens all the time. A lot of cases they can't be seen. They've actually shown that dangerous thyroid cancers, if you get the best doctors that are the best at examining a thyroid, they're going to catch about 10% of those. So yeah, so we can't be for sure. When we think someone has thyroid problems, we want to get an ultrasound for a starting place. So that's the best evaluation of the structure. In terms of the disease itself, the disease generally starts by the body attacking the thyroid and ultimately burns out the thyroid. Now, the problem is that testing is currently done only to assess that burn out stage. And yeah, that's a later stage of the process.
And when they're later in the process, that's usually when they're going and seeing their physician. So they may already have all these health issues ahead of time. They go in and see their physician. And then what would be a standard workup that somebody would have done maybe?
Yeah, the most common thing is a test for the TSH. This is the thyroid stimulating hormone. This is the pituitary gland asking the thyroid to work. And it's a backward thing. The thyroid's underactive, this number goes high. If it's overactive, it goes low. And in most cases, if someone suspects thyroid problems, all they'll do is have their TSH tested. Now, the problem there, as we mentioned, is that can be a later stage change. But it's not even just that, because many people will never have that change. Many will only have that autoimmunity, and they may have that for decades and decades. And that can hugely impact their bone health. That can affect their fertility. That can cause anxiety. That can cause heart disease, tons of symptoms, but it'll never go detected unless it's looked for.
Hey, it's Bone Coach Kevin Ellis. I want to take one more minute to talk about if you are somebody who was newly diagnosed with osteopenia or osteoporosis, and you're at a point where you're stressed, you're worried, you're overwhelmed, you have no idea where to start or how to get started getting confident in your plan. I want to tell you about the Stronger Bone Solution Program. Over 5,000 people have come through this Stronger Bone Solution Program, and it walks you through the exact process you need to fill in the missing pieces, uncover critical things in your plan that you may not be aware of, and help you make modifications, adjustments, and tweaks to get you to the place where you're building stronger bones. I want you to get confident in your plan so that you can focus on living life and enjoying the life that you deserve with the people you love most. So if that's where you want to be, head over to bonecoach.com/apply and apply for our Stronger Bone Solution Program right now. I'm Bone Coach Kevin Ellis. I want to see you inside this program. I want to help you get on the path to improvement and stronger bones. Hope to see you inside very soon. Let's get back to the episode. And then there's also a connection to thyroid health and our bone health too. Can you talk about what that would be?
For sure. So back to that idea of the thyroid telling stuff how quickly to grow. So we've got this activity of osteoclast, osteoblast, growing new bone, getting rid of old bone. And there's several different things that control that throttle, but thyroid hormones are very central there. And actually that TSH that I mentioned that tells the thyroid to work, it also tells the bone to grow. So if that's not there, or if that's there in the wrong amounts, we can get too little bone or poor quality bone.
And what are
briefly, independent of that, the autoimmune part can also affect bone health. We have data showing that now as well.
And what are the levels of thyroid hormone that you like to see?
So the numbers, the big discussion is, what's normal, what's healthy. So data has been done to say in populations of those who have the lowest thyroid symptoms, the lowest risk for thyroid disease, where do they fit in that continuum of normal? And remember the TSH was backwards. So high is low and low is high. So healthy people, and also those with thyroid disease that have better health outcomes, generally have a low normal TSH. So they're not below range, but they're generally on the lower side of normal. In terms of numbers, normal ranges are generally between 0.4 to 0.5 and about 4.5. And healthier people are usually between the bottom end of that 0.5 and like 2 roughly. So yeah, a really important point though is that if someone's not there, that doesn't mean they benefit from medication. That's a hugely important difference.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because that's what's going to happen for most people when they go into their physician and it's not in the right range or not where it needs to be. That would be the recommendation, right? So what are the treatments?
Kevin, you're going to need to put a leash on me in a minute here because I get out of control on this one.
Go for it.
So here comes the rant. Abnormal thyroid levels cause these problems. And if we were in a logical, simple world, you would think that fixing those levels would make those problems go away. And there's now about 30 million Americans on these medications. This is between the number 1 and number 3 most widely prescribed medication in the world in any given year. So this is pretty much why people go to the pharmacy. And we now know that over 90% of people, the level of thyroid dysfunction they had could have caused weight gain, could have caused fatigue, could have raised their heart disease risk long-term, could have affected their bones, could have raised the risk for thyroid cancer, can do all that stuff. However, for 90% of people or more, medications will not help any of those problems at all. It'll actually cause more risks for other issues, including bone problems, cancer risk, and total mortality risk. But for almost all people who are put on thyroid medications, it will not help them feel better, lose weight, have less risk of diseases, or have better outcomes.
Can we talk about each of the specific medications maybe, and like from a conventional perspective, what somebody may be recommended, and then even on the natural side?
And yeah, just to clarify, what I'm saying is not so much my emotional rant, but this was a large meta-analysis in the British Medical Journal from about 1.5 years ago. And it's saying, look, we're screwing up. We're putting people on medicine thinking it's going to help in ways that it doesn't. It causes more problems than good. This is a huge thing. There's different kinds of thyroid medication. The biggest question is who needs them? Many people get in this path of, am I on the right one? Am I in the right amount? I'm always juggling and my scores are never stable. They didn't need it to begin with. It's a fool's errand. They're chasing a red herring. And it's not that they're trying so hard to get this thing right, but they're trying the wrong thing to begin with. That's the core issue for so many cases.
And unfortunately, that's a very similar situation with osteopenia and osteoporosis too. It's the majority of people that I see too. It's there's so many other things that can be done before they get to that point. Haven't even been tried usually before they jump into a medication. Then,
well, and this is a case to where it's a really important distinction to see between the body doing what it does and then us intervening on the body doing what it does. And for quite a while, I would have thought that if what you're giving is identical to the body, if it's a natural hormone, if you're achieving normal healthy blood levels, I would have thought that someone like that is just like somebody else who's doing it by themselves. But I can't. That's unsustainable. The data is so clear that that's not the case. One big study from South Korea tracked over 1.5 million people for 4 years, and one large group was on thyroid medication, reasonable amounts. The other group was identical in every way imaginable. They had the same risk factors for death, like 19% hypertension in each group. It was amazingly matched groups. They had the same thyroid levels. One group was slightly medicated, one group was not. The mortality risks were twice as high in the medicated group. So taking a hormone is not the same as making a hormone. And when we intervene on what the body does, even if we think we can measure parts of what's happening, it's not the same.
now, beyond just medications, I've heard you speak about the dangers of too much iodine for those that are prone to thyroid disease. Can you talk about how you discovered this and why someone would limit their their iodine intake?
This is a really hopeful story. It's a fun one. So for a lot of years, all I knew about was the dangers, and nutrients, everyone gets that you can get too little. If you're out at sea and there's no oranges, you might get scurvy, right? And everyone knows that. That doesn't mean that one drop of lime juice is enough to make you optimally healthy. And there's also a point at where vitamin C can give you diarrhea, right? Like, 10,000 milligrams a day or something. But by and large, there's not a lot of concern about overdosing on nutrients. The toxicity is not a big thing. But iodine's different from all the others. And the reason why is the body has a special pump. So the amounts of it in circulation and in active tissues is thousands of fold lower than it is for all of the nutrients. So the body has a pump that also acts as a gatekeeper. So it pulls in just enough and it closes the gate to prevent there being too much. Now, because of that, that makes the therapeutic window of iodine really narrow. And for some people, even narrower yet. So in terms of actual numbers, no matter what your diet is, unless it's only raw vegetables and no salt, no joke, unless that's what your diet is, you're going to get 50 to 100 micrograms per day from any diet, at least that much. So the range in which we see the lowest rates of adult thyroid disease is about 20 to 200 micrograms per day. Now, anyone can get harmed if they're consistently above about 1,000 micrograms per day. But those prone to thyroid disease, it's 200. So this dietary amount they're already getting is about half of that. So if they get pushed above that from, some dietary sources having more than others, extra iodine in salt, some in supplements, they get thyroid disease. But the exciting part we'll talk more about is most of them can also reverse that.
And what are some of those foods that are the really high iodine foods also that may be continually pushing them over?
Yeah. So the biggest sources, this is kind of weird. So there's like half a dozen main sources. And of them, many of those foods, the amount of iodine in those foods has been pretty static over the decades. And the amount of these foods, as far as what proportion they are in our diet, has been pretty static. But a couple of the foods, the amount of iodine and the amount of those foods we consume has gone up. Those two are processed grains and dairy food. And it's a contaminant in both of them. It's not a normally occurring additive, but of the dietary sources of iodine, 23 of the top 25 have more than doubled in the last 3 decades. And they're pretty much all from those two categories. So those are the two big ones. The other ones are also relevant because it all stacks up. So when someone's working to get to a low threshold to reverse their thyroid disease, they want to go lower. But those two are the big ones. We get iodine in salt. It can be added in or naturally occurring. We get a fair amount in egg yolks. We get a fair amount in seafood, some more than others. And there's a fair amount in seaweed, aka sea vegetables.
And can you talk about, I know when you said dairy there for a second, and some of the other ones, how is iodine getting into dairy so people understand that?
Yeah, so this is weird. A couple of ways. One of which is that it's used as a teat sanitizer. They're working to phase that out right now. And it's not universal, but farmers have known for some time that its iodine is also an irritant and it's also not cost effective. So they get more and more skin irritation from chronic use of it. So in the coming years, this may now be moot, hopefully. But yeah, you paint it on the cow's teats, you put the vacuum on and you suck the milk out, and some of that iodine works its way in, and microscopic amounts add up. So the other thing is that cows are often given fish meal as a cheap protein source that can have a buildup of that. And then some cow food has iodine fortified into it.
Interesting. And are there, now we're talking about ways that could push your iodine level too much. Are there things that could be reducing your iodine level too?
Yeah, we've had 6 documented cases of iodine deficiency in the United States since 1980. So it happens. And all those 6 cases were people that were on diets that consumed only raw vegetables, no salt, nothing else. Several also had inflammatory bowel disease. They were malabsorbing. There's a lot of popular ideas about iodine being pushed out by halides, bromide or chlorine or fluoride. Those come up quite a bit. That's a fascinating thing. Did you know bromide is now the most recently categorized essential mineral? We now know our bodies require it. It turns out it's in so many sources, we hadn't really recognized deficiency states of it. But there was one study in which they gave supplemental doses of bromide way higher than background exposure and closely tracked thyroid function and closely tracked iodine levels. No effects whatsoever. So yeah, there's a lot of popular ideas that bounce around in natural medicine that make sense, but just aren't really grounded with the facts. And that's one of them.
Interesting. And what are your thoughts on high doses of iodine? There are different camps here, right?
Sure.
When it comes to iodine, what are the different camps? And then what are your thoughts on the high dose iodine?
Yeah, so iodine, this is fascinating. This is the most studied nutrient we have, full stop. We started looking at it over a century ago, and knowing about it made us discover about other vitamins. So we've got lots of data points on it, and that we can put that all here. And then we've got a group of ideas that kind of cluster together starting in 1998. A dear man who's a gynecologist, he's passed away. I spent a ton of time with him on the phone. He saw a study showing how high dose iodine lowered the symptoms of fibrocystic breast disease. Now, well intended, but not really having a nutritional background, he conflated iodine as a drug with iodine as a nutrient. So if I went outside and snagged my skin on a thorn, I could get infected, and iodine might stop that infection. But that wouldn't be an iodine deficiency, right? So yeah, there's ways in which iodine can actually stop the effects of iodine absorption, and that's how it lowered those symptoms. But he conflated that to mean they were iodine deficient. And he wrote a series of papers over the following 4 years that others went on and shared just directly as they were, and they became quite influential in natural medicine. So there's like dozens of ideas that just all stem from this one little thing, and then we've got this other century worth of database on iodine.
And your focus is, it may be helpful to limit that iodine intake.
It's not good or bad, it's just amounts, and we see right now in 92, 112 nations on earth were categorized as severely iodine deficient. They needed more. They were below a good range. By 2014, that number was brought down to 0. The United States, as an average, our intake, remember that 50 to 200 thing, we're clocking in around 170 to 180 on an average. But when we look more deeply at subpopulations, if we look per age, ethnicity, and gender, many subpopulations have between 20 to 40% of individuals above that 200 microgram threshold. So some people get too much. And when they develop thyroid disease from that, there have now been multiple studies showing that if they can get to a low enough level, they've got about an 80% chance of fully reversing most forms of thyroid disease.
And so do you typically encourage people when they have their supplements or they're taking their supplements or they're like looking at their diet too? And I know you have a book on this specifically, also the Thyroid Reset Diet. Could you talk a little bit about that? And what are the things that people should be evaluating in their daily lives and their plans to make sure they have the right amounts of certain nutrients for thyroid health?
Sure. So iodine is the biggest one by far. One study suggested that of all the factors relevant to thyroid function that we can control. So remember I talked about age, gender, and then a big environmental trigger, the big one being iodine. Of all the things we can control, we can't control age and gender, but the things that we can, many have argued that everything together is less relevant than iodine is by itself. So yeah, that's the big one. You want to not be deficient in any nutrient for lots of reasons, all facets of health. But for your thyroid, yeah, iodine, selenium, zinc, iron, these are the big ones that make the most differences.
And can you talk about your book also, the Thyroid Reset Diet, and how you decided to develop this, and kind of give us a preview into what that looks like?
You know, I came across a big study that took people who had rather advanced hypothyroidism. For those who have heard these numbers, I mentioned the TSH, like 0.4 to 4.5. In the study, the average TSH score was 14.1. They had been markedly hypothyroid for over 4 years, and most had clear signs of autoimmunity. And they did nothing other than lower their iodine for 3 months. Within those 3 months, 78.3% of people had perfectly normal thyroid function. They'd been off for more than 4 years. They were not given medication. They were just, and they weren't given, it wasn't healthy diet per se. It was just this one variable was all that they changed. And the 78.3%, I'd take that and run with it. But that kind of short sells how cool this was, because a good chunk of people were not compliant. You know, they measured their iodine output and like, yeah, well, you know, I didn't do this or I didn't do that. Okay. But they were part of those numbers, right? And another chunk of people radically improved, but they didn't normalize. Like they went from scores of 200 down to 50. So they didn't go in the 78%, but they got a whole lot better. So if we were to reword that and say, of those who did it, you know, how many were totally cured or got a heck of a lot better, that number was 97%. And there was multiple studies just like that on different versions of thyroid disease. So I saw these and like, no one's talking about this. So yeah, I had to just make that really public. And the other thing was that this was observed from people who were put on low iodine diets before they were getting a procedure done. There's some procedures that you need to have the body in a low iodine state to work well. And these diets are mostly constructed to where they're only going to be on them for a week or two. And so they didn't have to think about being complete diets or easy diets or tasty diets or, you know, healthy diets. Just cut all this stuff out for 2 weeks and then don't ever do that again. And I didn't want to do that because many people would do this for months and months on end. So I wanted to say, what else do we know about thyroid health? And what else is relevant to your healthy diet in general? You know, let's put this together and do it in a way to where we can get to that target to really reverse these thyroid problems.
Hey, it's Bone Coach Kevin Ellis. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of the Bone Coach Show. If you're finding it helpful, please leave a positive rating and review. Hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast or the channel. That lets us help more people and reach and serve more people. And it also lets us know that this is helpful to you on your journey to better health and stronger bones. And then also, right down in the show notes, you can actually find a link to my free Bone Healthy Recipes Guide. That's going to give you access to some amazing and delicious recipes to support your journey to stronger bones. And then also, we have a link to my free Stronger Bones Masterclass in the show notes too. And that is the 3-step process that has helped people in over 1,500 cities around the world get confident in their plan for stronger bones. Over 110,000 people have taken part in this, and it's been really, really helpful for them. And I want you to have free access to it too. So add your name and email right down there in the show notes, get access to that free Stronger Bones Masterclass, and let's get you confident in your Stronger Bones plan today. That's amazing. And I mean, I know you've put together now multiple bodies of work and books. Can you actually just talk about what are all the resources that you have available to people right now?
Well, that was the most recent one that was really focused on reversing thyroid disease, on medication or not, Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism, subclinical, Graves' disease, all those versions can be useful for. The prior one was metabolism reset. And that was kind of my best stab at what do you do if you can't lose weight? You know, and specifically for those with thyroid disease. But yeah, weight problems, fatty liver, prediabetes, that was my real good attempt at how to address it. You know, and just a couple points, I realized that a diet that's a healthy diet you can live with might not reverse a problem. You know, so it takes doing something different for a while. And that something different might not be something you should live with. It might need to be deliberate and short term. So yeah, how can you do a short process to reverse the way the body is storing fuel wrong and have the liver work right again so the body can burn fat effectively for fuel? So that was the metabolism reset. And before that was the adrenal reset. And these three were in a theme. I've written others, but to touch on these. So that was really about this whole thing about our circadian cortisol rhythm. And yeah, there's so many ways in which modern life throws that off. Chronic stress, blood sugar issues, sleep problems, and the implications of that are massive. One study showed that an abnormal cortisol slope can be a stronger predictor of death than smoking status is. It's a big deal. And so the thought was, it's not that the adrenals are broken. It's not that they're fatigued. It's that the body is in this state to where the timing is disrupted. So how do you get that back again? And there's cortisol, its main job is as a glucose regulating hormone, a glucocorticoid. So the thought was, how can you time carbohydrate in a way to recreate a healthy cortisol rhythm? And that was the basic idea behind the adrenal reset diet.
That's great. And then you've also got this, you've got the Hormone Healing Cookbook. Is that right too?
Yeah. This is the newest. I'm excited about this. So part of this was a cookbook. So part of this was everyone has done these various resets and like, hey, Dr. C, I want more recipes. So that was part of it. But another part was, yeah, I'm in this perimenopause, menopausal change. I'm struggling with weight, fatigue, brain fog, hot flashes, sleep issues. I'm not sure about hormones, about other treatments. I'm doing them, they're not enough. Are there some natural ways to help? And the cool thing is there's massive data sets about the effect of phytonutrients specifically on those hormonal problems. The stuff in plants can help our body heal our hormones. We co-evolved with plants and we can use them to deliberately regulate these things. So like, here's 80 great recipes. And if you want to tackle one of those 5 problems, here's a 2-week menu list that'll target all the things just for that. Any one of those.
I love that. I love that. And I know specifically, I know we were originally just talking about the Thyroid Reset Diet, but it's great to know that if you have thyroid disease, any thyroid conditions, that there are things you can do there. You can absolutely improve those things. And I know you just talked about all your books there, but could you maybe just share where can people find you and all your resources and things like that? And then if there are any other notes that you think are important for our audience to understand, maybe just share that with them as well.
Sure. Yeah, my main hub is drchristianson.com, S-O-N, the main website. If you plug in Alan Christianson, you'll find it, but that's where it all stems from. Things to share. I just got briefly on my rant about medications. People can need them. They can be totally appropriate, thyroid medications. But when they're not needed, all the studies I mentioned about showing how they didn't work as well, that spawned other studies saying, well, then what do you do? Then can people come off? How does that work? So the term is deprescribing. And there's a lot of data sets now around that. I've written tons of big articles and videos talking about it, but we now know that of most people on thyroid medication, 84% can successfully take less, and about half can successfully take none. And by successfully, I mean no symptoms, no abnormal blood levels. And those numbers came from studies in which there wasn't a whole lot of nuanced stuff going on. It was pretty much just, here's a taper schedule, have fun. But with thoughtful steps, the kind of good advice you're giving with covering your nutrients well, that 84% can be better. So most people can have some of their function come back or all of it. And that's a big win.
Wonderful. And what would be the 3 biggest takeaways, if you could name any, that you would want people to walk away from this conversation with?
Boy, the single biggest one is that you're in charge of what's happening with your body. And the decisions you make on a daily basis are more powerful than anything. I've gone through stages of this to where originally that was my big thing, lifestyle. The further I got into medical training, there was times in which you can't help but get excited about the power of medication, and you can intervene as an endocrinologist. You can change these levels. We can intervene in various ways. We can give medications. And I've come to realize that they have their place, but they're not powerful. The things that we can do in our movement outside, our relationships, our sleep, our diet, that's the real medicine. That's the big guns. And you guys have control of that. You've got a resource here of Kevin for information on how to do that better. So yeah, don't ever think that you need more than that.
I love that. What a great message. And, for everybody listening, I want to make sure you have access to all of Dr. Alan Christianson's resources. You can find all of that over at bonecoach.com/Dr. Alan Christianson, Thyroid Reset Diet. We're going to have all the links in the show notes. And then also Dr. Alan Christianson is on Instagram too. We'll make sure we link to his Instagram page as well. And I just want to thank everybody again so much for your time. We'll see you in the next episode. Hey, it's Bone Coach Kevin Ellis. Hope you found that episode helpful and that you enjoyed it. Just one last reminder, if you haven't done so already, head over to bonecoach.com, sign up for your free 7-day osteoporosis kickstart. It's going to tell you everything you need to do to start getting on the path to improvement. Hope you found this helpful. I'm your Bone Coach Kevin Ellis. I'll see you soon.